It was in the 1800s, when the lands of America were still raw with wilderness and the towns were only beginning to take shape, that the shadow of the Blackwood family began to spread. The century was restless, filled with new roads, restless men, and the slow birth of power in every direction. Yet beneath the promise of growth and the glow of lamps in the young cities, there were houses that carried silence and families that guarded secrets darker than night. Among them was the line of Blackwoods, a family bound not by honor, but by blood twisted inward. A blood that turned against itself through generations until it produced a woman whose very existence became a mark of horror. The Blackwoods lived at the edge of settlements, always apart, never truly part of the towns they neighbored. Their land was heavy with trees, their house built from black timber cut from the forests themselves, and the air around them seemed older than the land it rested on. They were whispered about by neighbors, yet seldom approached, for every attempt at friendship or kinship ended in coldness. It was said that they wished to keep their blood pure, to preserve their line untainted, and for that reason they turned to their own kin when it came to marriage. Brother to sister, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, generation upon generation they locked themselves inside their own blood. At first, the signs were not so clear. In the earliest decades, the children of Blackwood seemed like others. They worked the land, they hunted in the forest, they bore the hard faces of pioneers. But slowly, with each generation, something began to change. The eyes of the children grew strange, set deep and far apart. Their speech grew heavy, their limbs awkward, their minds clouded. By the time the century reached its middle years, the townsfolk no longer looked at them as neighbors, but as creatures who carried some ancient curse. The Blackwoods themselves never admitted shame. They believed themselves set apart, chosen, keepers of an inheritance that no outsider could share. Their family Bible bore the names of marriages that would have been forbidden in any church, yet they recorded them proudly, as though each union was a victory against the world beyond their land. They seldom came into town except to buy salt or iron, and when they did, they spoke little, keeping their eyes lowered, but their presence heavy upon those who saw them. From this line, across many decades, came a woman whose name passed into whispers as the most inbred woman the nation had ever known. Her story was not told in the open, but carried in fragments by doctors, by travelers, and by those who dared approach the edge of Blackwood land. She was born in a time when the family had already folded in upon itself too many times to count. Her father was also her mother's cousin. Her grandfather had been both uncle and brother-in-law to his own kin. The blood had wound itself into knots so deep that by the time she came into the world, her very body carried the cost. From the moment of her birth, her cries were weak, and the midwife who delivered her crossed herself, saying she had never seen such a child. Her eyes were uneven, her jaw narrow and strange, her limbs frail and bent. Yet she lived, and the family raised her with a fierce protection, as though she was their proof that the Blackwood line would never break. They did not allow her to be seen by strangers. The neighbors knew only that a daughter had been born, but no one beyond the family ever saw her face in those early years. As she grew, her body carried the marks of generations of inbreeding. Her mind too faltered, for she learned words slowly, and her speech was thick and broken. Still, among her kin she was treasured. They whispered that she was the jewel of the Blackwoods, the one who carried all of their blood within her, undiluted and pure. To them she was not cursed but chosen. She was kept within the house, and her world was no wider than the wooden walls and the deep forest beyond. The decades turned, and still the Blackwoods guarded her. By the time she was grown, the town nearby had heard rumors of her condition. Whispers spread that the family was breeding monsters, that they were mocking God by uniting blood that was never meant to be joined. Some claimed to have seen her shadow through the windows, a bent figure that did not move like other women, and the tales grew wilder with each telling. Yet none could prove them, for no outsider was ever welcomed into the house. Her life was one of silence and shadow. She seldom stepped into the sunlight, and when she did, her body seemed to shrink from it. The family clothed her in long garments and covered her head, as though the very sight of her was a treasure that must be hidden. But even within those walls, the curse grew deeper. She was not only the child of kin, but she too was given to kin. Her cousin became her husband, and from that union came children whose cries were shorter than most, whose lives often ended before their first years. Those who survived bore the same marks of twisted blood, faces strange, minds clouded, bodies broken. Yet the Blackwoods did not stop. To them, every death was simply part of the price, every deformity a sign that their blood was too strong for the world outside. They did not seek new blood, they did not repent. They went on as they always had, binding themselves ever tighter into their own web. And she, the woman born of too many such unions, remained at the center of it all, both victim and symbol. Her name faded in the telling, for the town never spoke it openly. To the neighbors, she was only the Blackwood woman, the most inbred of them all, the living mark of what happens when blood turns against itself. Those who dared to describe her spoke of a face that seemed to bear the weight of centuries, a body frail yet heavy with silence, a presence that unsettled even without words. She lived long, longer than many of her kin, though her body remained weak and her mind clouded. She became almost a spirit to the townsfolk, a legend that children feared and parents spoke of in hushed tones. To the family, she was holy, their proof that no matter what the world thought, the Blackwood blood could endure even in its most twisted form. When she finally died, the family buried her not in the churchyard, but deep in their own land, under the roots of the black trees that had always watched over them. The generations after her continued as they always had, but her memory lingered. She became the dark heart of their tale, the one who carried the blood to its breaking point. In whispers and fragments, her story left the woods and reached the towns. And from the towns it spread further until she was named in hushed voices as the most inbred woman America had ever known. Not because she chose it, not because she sought it, but because she was born into a family that sealed itself off from the world until its blood turned upon itself. And so her life became not just the story of one woman, but the story of the Blackwood family itself, a family that chose secrecy over kinship with the world, and in doing so bound itself to a fate darker than the woods they lived in. The Blackwoods passed into legend, and their land grew empty, their house rotting into the soil, but her shadow remained. For even when the walls fell and the trees swallowed the paths, the tale was told and retold of the woman who bore the curse of too much blood turned inward, and of the family who would forever be remembered for her.